A More Perfect Union, the opening track on the album and the song that made me famous and the song that they'll put on my tombstone. A More Perfect Union is a song about driving, and it's a song about driving towards something, but also very much about driving away from something, driving away from a past, driving away from an environment that you didn't choose, an upbringing that maybe didn't suit you, and driving towards some kind of imagined future or towards some kind of promised land where you're going to have a new life and a lot more agency and the ability to become the person that you believe yourself to be and be a lot more autonomous in the process of becoming that person rather than just living on the same straight line that you've been expected to, where you'll just replace the people that came before you only to be replaced yourself when it's your turn and just be grist for the mill. And it's about the feeling of being in the car and tearing up the highway and imagining that there's like a big wide open world in front of you that's yours for the taking. And this is, one of the great themes in rock music. Roadrunner by the Modern Lovers could be the perfect example. Bruce Springsteen, Thunder Road would be another one. There's a million of them. It's one of the most classic archetypes for a rock song. And this, A More Perfect Union, was my entry to that canon. And not unlike Thunder Road on the Born to Run album, it is the opening of our story. And our narrator is escaping from somewhere. In his mind, he's on to bigger and better things and new adventures and just a much more wide open world. And it describes very much what my life was like at that time, both in terms of being on the road with the rock band, but also commuting back and forth from New Jersey to Boston, which is something I'd done a lot over the previous few years because of that girlfriend I mentioned. So there was a lot of time in the car driving between Boston and New York and back and forth and driving on all those highways I mentioned, New Jersey Route 17, Interstate 80, Interstate 84, the Merritt Parkway, all these different arteries that connected these metro areas. I'm singing about that part of my life, that routine, and this is also where I wrote the song, is in the car. Like, the thing that I'm singing about is actually happening to me as I'm writing it. And this was how a lot of the songs on the record came together, is just me on these long drives. Because I didn't have a CD player in the car or anything, maybe like cassette player, but, going places where I don't know the radio stations and just kind of having these ideas in my head that I'm trying to expand on and to create a record. I'm driving and I just, think of the lyrics and I just come up with these ideas and kind of just sing them to myself. This was before smartphones and everything. So many times I would have to, pull over either on, the gas station or even just on the side of the road and look around the car for like a piece of paper or like some cardboard or something and try and find like a pen or a Sharpie marker and write these lyrics down before I forgot them. So at many of the ends of these drives, I would have, the songs that would become this record, and A More Perfect Union is one of those songs. I should also say it's divided into two parts. You know, there's the first half of the song, which is more like regular rock, which is the very hopeful and optimistic part. It's just about the most hopeful, optimistic piece of music in my entire catalog. And then there is the second half of it, which is like kind of the more Irish sounding part, which is when our narrator, our hero, discovers that the new world which he's entering is actually not that different from the previous one. And the forces by which he was beset in his old life are still present and still ready to do their wicked work. And this change of scenery, this change of lifestyle has not actually solved his problems internally or externally. And that is kind of the beginning of our story. A More Perfect Union pretty much was always going to be the opening track in like the schematic of the album. And here's a tip for any young artists out there. If you have an album to write, it can be useful early on in the process to decide what the themes and the motifs and what the larger story of the album is going to be. If you're the sort of person that likes these kinds of concept albums and rock operas and stuff, that can be very useful because when you have those themes in place and you basically know what it is that you want to talk about, it eliminates a lot of the guesswork and it takes away a lot of the terror of the empty page. Because sometimes when you sit down to write a song or to create any piece of art, you can become paralyzed by how many options there are out there as far as things to discuss or subject matters to explore. So if early on in the process, you decide what it is that you want to talk about, like, you know, in my case, I'm want to do this whole Civil War thing, that makes it a lot easier to just kind of put one foot in front of the other during the process. So in the case of A More Perfect Union, I was like, well, look at me. I got this kind of like upbeat, heraldic, sort of anthemic bunch of riffs and melodies here. This is like, could be pretty exciting as like an opening track. Why don't I just go ahead and see if I can come up with some lyrics that will be like a good introduction to the little story that I'm trying to tell, which to me was a lot easier than if I would have just said, oh, well, I can write about anything in the world. I can't decide, so I'm going to just write nothing, which is a trap that, you know, that artists can fall into sometimes, but it didn't get me that time. So as I'm watching this film, and the film is explaining how America got itself in such a tight spot, and how these two opposing camps within the American government and the American culture just couldn't quite get on the same page. It seemed very familiar and it seemed very modern and contemporary to me, as far as the things that I'd been observing in my young adulthood from the George W. Bush years. And this was the very beginning of the Obama era when I was watching this film. And it seemed to me that the problems that had been the impetus for the American Civil War of the 1860s hadn't really been resolved. And that the issues and the problems explained in the film were very much the issues that we as a country were facing at that time. And indeed, we seem to be facing still today. At the same time, I've also become aware of a concept in postmodernism, whatever that is, that certain people have a tendency to define themselves by an absence. To put it another way, they frame their own identity in the negative. Rather than saying, I'm X, they say, I'm not Y. More and more, I started to think that a lot of people that had really loud voices and really strong opinions about things maybe weren't defining themselves or their identity or their ideology in a positive way, but rather defining themselves negatively in opposition to something else. And feeling very strongly about that. And this was creating like what we would later, commonly call tribalism within America, like within our political system and within our culture, where we have a deeply polarized citizenry and electorate who are full of vitriol and hatred for the people that they perceive to be on the opposing team. And this hatred and this opposition that they have to the other side is more important to them than what their side actually believes or claims to believe. And these people seem to not care to think about, like, what do I want? What do I actually believe in? What do I think is right? And are far more concerned with whatever I perceive the other side to believe. I am simply going to believe the opposite of that. And this was a trend that I saw emerging, in the culture and in the media and even in just, day-to-day interactions I would have with regular people. This was a trend that I found to be kind of alarming, but something that I was interested in exploring to the best of my marijuana-addled insomniac ability. So if you're going to talk about A More Perfect Union, the song, obviously we need to talk about the iconic opening monologue that opens the track and indeed the album. And this was a recitation performed by a really incredible man named Oki Canfield Chenoweth III. And Mr. Chenoweth was the drama teacher at Glen Rock High School in Glen Rock, New Jersey, where I'm from. And he was a serious local legend that had taught drama at the high school for like 30 or 40 years or something by the time that I became his student around the year 2000. And he had taught my older brother, and he had directed him as the lead in Eugene Ionesco's Rhinoceros, which was a very heady play, and it was really, a formative experience for me watching my brother perform this role when I was like 8 or 9, I guess. And I eventually became Mr. Chenoweth's student, and he was an incredible man, and he actually just passed away a few months ago. So I've thought about him, a little more than usual lately. But he was something else, and he is, a towering figure in my early life and taught me, some of the most valuable lessons in the arts. in just studying under him for just 2 years, he's had like as much of an impact on me as anybody else in my artistic development and more than most. And his big thing was truthfulness. He really wanted you, when you got up on stage, like whatever you were going to say, the important thing was that the audience believed you, or rather, the audience believed no matter how outlandish the thing that you were saying was, the audience would believe that you believed it. Like Mr. Chenoweth directed me in Hamlet, where I played the ghost of Hamlet's father. So I get up on stage and I say, I am your father's spirit. And like, obviously I'm not. I'm just a high school kid who's very much alive. But the point of his direction was often just trying to get us to deliver the lines with like the necessary conviction that the audience would think that you really believed what you were saying. That was like his main thing. Because nobody wants to see a guy up on stage who like probably doesn't really mean whatever he's saying. Nobody wants to see that. Mr. Chenoweth's other big thing was raising the stakes. Whatever action you're doing on stage, whatever kind of situation you're in, if it's not working and if it's not coming across to the audience, then you would just raise the stakes, start behaving as though it's more important than it actually is. That could be something, like if the guy in the scene, like, can't find his pen or something, just for an example, like his direction would be like, act as though if you don't find the pen, you're going to die. Or like the world will explode if you don't find this pen. Like that's where he liked the stakes to be on the stage and in the arts. And though I'm not an actor exactly, this idea of like trying to be truthful or, presenting a version of truthfulness while also raising the stakes and ratcheting up the intensity and just generally doing whatever you're doing with a lot of conviction and commitment to the bit are, values that I tried very deliberately to keep with me throughout my career in the arts. So that was Okie Chenoweth for you in a nutshell. And he was kind enough when we were making the first Titus Andronicus record, he allowed me to come over to his house on Route 202 in Oakland, New Jersey with my little 4-track cassette recorder. And he read for me a passage from The Stranger by Albert Camus, which was a, very important book to me at that time. And after the first record did so well, Mr. Chenoweth did such a fantastic job with that reading. I said, well, why don't we're taking everything about the first album up at least one notch. Maybe I should, get Mr. Chenoweth, give him an even larger role on the second record. And by that point, I'd kind of decided that we were going to go with this Civil War thing. And I've been watching the Ken Burns movie. And in the first episode of the Ken Burns movie, there is a reading or a recitation from Abraham Lincoln's address to the Springfield Young Men's Lyceum. I'm just watching episode 1 of the Civil War documentary, and all of a sudden, Sam Waterston, who we remember from Law and Order, he starts reading this speech, from whence shall we expect the approach of danger? But I'm listening to this speech and this incredible performance by Sam Waterston, and I'm just like completely gobsmacked. Like this almost knocks me on the floor. Like I couldn't believe that I'd never heard these words before. Like I thought this was just the greatest string of words that anybody had ever put together. Like the speech has become a lot more famous now, but at the time, I had never heard it before, and I was just like, holy guacamole, like this is the best thing there is, and I'm gonna take this, because that was my attitude at the time, and I guess still is, that, anything that's out there in the air, and certainly in the public domain, I can use that for my own selfish purposes. So that's exactly what I did, and I went out and I got a book of Abraham Lincoln's writings and his speeches, and it had that address in it. And I brought it over to Mr. Chenoweth's house in Oakland, along with my little 4-track cassette recorder, just like I'd done for the first album. And I had him read that speech into the little microphone that I brought. And, the incredible actor that Mr. Chenoweth was, very talented guy with a lot of gravitas. And he delivered that monologue, really beautifully, and gave me like a really nice way to kick off this album. And I would like to say, I didn't realize it at the time, but I actually completely fucked myself when I did this. A lot of the times records have skits. Like it was early on, that was very common in, hip hop, that they would have samples or like stuff from like movies, like Wu-Tang Clan, of course, was probably the best at this. They would fill up their albums with all these excerpts from all the old Kung Fu movies that they would watch as kids. And so you'd put in the Wu-Tang Clan CD and you'd be greeted by some dialogue from a Kung Fu movie and maybe like some, sound effects and stuff. And then one of RZA's incredible beats would drop and you would be off to the races. And that's like a great experience for the listener. And this practice, to give credit where it's due, in the indie rock world, this was normalized by Bright Eyes. All those early Bright Eyes albums usually would start off with like some kind of skit. And as a fan of those records at the time, I thought that was a cool thing. To me, it was a very effective way to start the listening experience. And plenty of other rock acts were doing it. It was like a thing in like pop punk and emo as well. So it was normalized within rock music. This tradition that, as far as I knew, it started in hip hop, was now fair game for rock. And so I said, well, look at me. Like I got this great speech, these incredible words of Abraham Lincoln, recited beautifully by Mr. Chenoweth, who's such an important guy to me and so talented. And I've got this like certified banger, like this crazy heat rock of an opening track that's like, I don't know it yet, but everyone's going to say this is my best ever song. So like, what could be more perfect than this? And to have, when Mr. Chenoweth gets to that part about as a nation of free men will live together or die by suicide, all that, guitar feedback and stuff that had been percolating in the background, busts in with that big driving rock beat from Eric Harmon. And we're off. Like we really are like, blasting into hyperdrive at that point. And at the risk of sounding immodest, like I think that what we achieved with that introduction was the absolute apotheosis of that whole idea of having like some kind of skit or monologue or spoken sampled thing bust into like a big, awesome song. Nobody has done it better than we did at that time, before or since, in my humble opinion. Like we nailed it. Like that was the perfect version of that idea, in my humble opinion. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I was completely fucking myself in the long term. What you have to understand, when all these choices are being made, this is the year 2009, and there's no such thing as Spotify. There's no streaming. As far as we know, this album is going to be received by the audience as, a piece of vinyl or a compact disc, or worst case scenario, it's going to be an iTunes download, okay? You can't just listen to it on a whim for free on the internet. I mean, you can, though. You can get it for free because you can download it on Napster or LimeWire or SoulSeek or whatever at the time. But as far as we knew, the listener's experience was going to be acquiring this album as a singular, cohesive piece of art, like a single object, one product. And it was going to be absorbed as such. People were going to get it, whether it was the CD, the vinyl, the download, whatever. And they were going to have it and they were going to put it on and they were going to listen to it. And I thought this whole spoken intro busting into this classic song was the perfect way to begin that experience for the listener. And everybody that's heard it agrees with me. Like, it is an awesome experience for people that had the experience that way. But when you look at the way that the music industry is now and the different way that music is consumed, what happens to me all the time now, I've realized in just like the past year or so, people find out, oh, there's this band called Titus Andronicus. They're supposed to be pretty good or whatever. I'll check them out. Or my friend says Titus Andronicus is good. I'm going to listen to him. Or I meet somebody in real life that doesn't know that I'm a musician. And they say, oh, you're in a band. What's it called? I say Titus Andronicus. They say, I'll check it out. So 100 out of 100 times when people go to check out this music, they go to Spotify or, whatever streaming service they're using. And they see that the most played Titus Andronicus song is called A More Perfect Union. And by far, it's the most played. It's the most popular song that we've got by a factor of 5. And so it's only right that these people will say, oh, well, I'll listen to this, and that will be my introduction to the music of Titus Andronicus. And then, so they press play on it, and they're expecting some kind of rock and roll song. And what instead they have is this elderly man reciting this speech from freaking, 170 years ago. And there's like weird noises percolating in the background. And there's like a whole minute of that before the band kicks in with like the real song. And lately it seems to me that has probably been a huge hindrance to, Titus Andronicus continuing to grow our audience, because everybody that's like, oh, yeah, I'll check that band out. They go and they play the first song that they see, and it's not a fucking song. Like, they're not going to sit there for a whole minute, more likely than not. I think they probably, a lot of them, I think, have listened to 10 seconds and they're like, who's this elderly man? I'm turning this off. And then that's it with them and Titus Andronicus music. It never occurred to me until very recently, but I'd really have to wonder, like, how many people got Titus Andronicus recommended to them and maybe would have liked everything about the band and become huge fans of ours, but weren't able to sit through a whole minute of this strange monologue and just never came back. So I really wonder about that. And I do think that I might have totally fucked myself by achieving the absolute pinnacle of the whole opening a record with a little skit concept. But I guess if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change anything because it is so banging.